Welcome back, everybody. So, after a fair bit of thought and time has kind of gone by, I've decided that I'm not really using the lead screw printer like I thought I would, not to the level that it is, and I've gotten some really good results out of the Foundry Special prototype that I've been running, and pretty much all my prints now have been run on the Foundry Special. And it's getting to be where I'm not really using these little print farm printers as much as I used to. So what I'm going to end up doing is I offered to a friend of mine who does a lot of cosplay stuff to purchase one of these printers at a discounted price from what I paid for it. Now, mind you, I've done some upgrades to like the extruder. I printed this bracket up. We're going to add in a MOSFET for the heated bed, which will further prolong the life of the main board here. And then this whole thing is going to actually end up screwed down to the frame, the reinforcing frame for the lead screw printer. So originally I was going to put the lead screw printer back to a normal printer, but this one's actually overall in better shape. It has a lot less hours than the lead screw printer does. The main thing we're going to do is we're going to alter this harness so you can do a quick swap of fans in the future, because using these fans is just a pain in the butt when you got to take and clip the wires and resolder, because the wire you get on these replacement fans is just a little short nubbin. Another thing we're going to do is we're going to reroute this harness so that way it comes from up here and then drops down. The reason being that on the lead screw printer, when this thing homes out, it comes down and it likes to pinch the wire in this mechanism here. So we don't want that to happen. And then lastly, we're going to add in MOSFET and just in general make this wiring not be such a mess, because I don't like it. It just doesn't look good. But anyway, we'll get all that fixed and then we'll give it a good test run.
I'm starting off this printer modifications by adding in a quick disconnect plug. The original fans just had a really long wire to feed directly to the control board, so when I had to replace the fans, I just clipped the wires and soldered the new ones to the existing harness. But since this printer is not going to be with me, I need to make it more user serviceable. Now, the pliers I'm using are pretty much the only way to do these connectors. I've tried it using like a pair of needle nose to smash everything down, and it really doesn't work. It's just, you can't get a good crimp and it's not consistent. Those pliers were not cheap. They're almost $20 for that pair of pliers, but if you do this kind of work on a regular basis, it's the only way to do these plugs properly. I designed up this holding fixture, and I left the link in the video here, so if you guys want to go make one yourself, just to hold everything in alignment while I'm putting these plugs on, makes the soldering job go a lot easier. It was really designed to sit on a bench and be bolted down, but it worked okay in this application. And now I'm just going to go through and rewrap this harness, make it all nice and neat. This printer used to be set up with drag chains, and due to poor engineering on the drag chain, it ended up breaking the wiring for the extruder. And so I went and replaced it and removed the drag chain and just laid the wire up over the top. So I decided I should reroute everything and get it running through the routing hole that's provided on the printer. And then I'm also moving a couple of these other harnesses just so that they don't get in the way of things while the printer's in operation, and just generally to try and make everything as neat as possible. biggest upgrade this printer is getting is a MOSFET for the heated bed. The main reason is I want to distribute the power load, and I again left a link in the video here for you if you guys want to download your own support bracket for it. But having all the power run through a single connector tends to make that connector get a little bit on the warm side. So far I've had good luck with these connectors not failing, but I would rather distribute the load through two sources, and the bed is pretty much the highest current demand for the printer as a whole. So having that have its own dedicated power means less is going through the main plug on the board, and less current makes less heat, and thus it's going to be more reliable long term. And now I'm going to feed a new wire from the power supply side through all the provided holes, making sure I'm clear of any kind of moving components, and then making the power connections on the new MOSFET for the bed. Be careful when you are tightening these connections down that you don't rip the mounting off, the screw terminal off of the MOSFET. It's fairly robust, but it's not something you want to mess up. It'll ruin the MOSFET. Now that I've removed the old on-off switch, we're going to make the connections for the MOSFET here, and then we're going to add in the new on-off switch. And originally I had this configured, or this on-off switch configured differently, but we're going to run it through this little hole in the frame here, and then have it out in front of the printer. Before it was behind, and it was a real pain to get to when you basically had to reach through the printer, which is not the best plan. At this point, all the electrical work is basically done. So I'm going to go through and remove some of the drag chain mounting, and then we're going to be swapping out all the pulleys to a 20-tooth pulley. The reason for doing that is the 16-tooth that came with the printer does not travel as smoothly with these belts. So it was something that I discovered when I was putting together the Foundry Special, that the 20-tooth is a much smoother overall travel. You lose about 10% of your torque, give or take, due to the lack of, or the less mechanical advantage, because the pulley is physically a bigger diameter. We'll also have to change the steps per millimeter on this. The current is 100 steps per millimeter, and I think, if my memory suits me, it's going to be 80 steps per millimeter to make it translate correctly on this new setup. After putting on these pulleys, the belt was just a little bit too tight, so we're going to just take it loose back here and readjust it, retighten it down, and that gives just the right amount of tension without having too much slop. On the bed, I've already swapped the forwardmost pulley, so we just kind of changed the one that's on the actual stepper motor itself in the back there. And again, we're just going to have to readjust the belt a little bit to give the right amount of tension and have everything travel nice. But that's easy enough done just by adjusting these nuts on the base. These first two screws are really hard to hold in place, so I've just put a little piece of masking tape just to hold the head, because I'll be able to, just with the natural friction and everything, tighten them all the way up once we're in position. But yeah, we'll get those first two started and locked down. There's a third one that's up above that I should be able to reach from the top side here. There's actually a little bit of room there. And I really don't like this setup. I'd rather just have a rigid frame from the get-go, which is why I'm not going to use this technique for my print farm printers in the future. But yeah, it was going to work really well for my friend. Add quite a bit of rigidity to the entire setup. These hold down brackets really are a critical part of the equation, because once it's locked into this frame and the bed is calibrated, the frame's rigid enough that the bed shouldn't really change its position at all. And again, found that with the Foundry Special, that I could pick it up and move it around, set it on different surfaces, and the bed really wouldn't change at all. So that's what we want for the consistency of everything. And now we're going to drill and tap the holes for the new on-off switch location. There's still some holes in the back where it used to be, because it used to be in the very back corner behind everything. But this location should be a lot better for usability. And I did the first hole, drilled and tapped, locked it down. Now we're going to take it apart, because there's a bunch of sawdust now inside the plug box that I got to remove. And then we'll tap this, make sure everything's nice and clean. This is a fairly fine thread screw, and actually has quite a bit of holding power in this material that I'm installing it in.
Well, that's pretty much it on this one. I need to reflash the firmware, so because I changed the pulleys for both the bed and the gantry, so I need to reduce the number of steps. This one's currently 100 steps per millimeter. I got to drop it down to 80 steps per millimeter, but it seems to be moving just fine, so I'm not too worried about that. As we get all the way to the edge of the travel, all the way down, we still have a little bit of slack in the wire, which is how we want it to be. Then we get over to this other side, and it pretty well clears everything it needs to clear just naturally. Same thing when the bed goes all the way back to the stop. We got a little bit of slack there, so that way when even if there's a tall piece on here, it won't hit that when it homes out after finishing the print. Yeah, I had this frame on a different printer. This was actually on my lead screw printer. And one of the things I hated the most was having this power switch buried in the back corner. So I moved it up front where it's nice and easy to get to. So in the case of an emergency, you can hit the button, shut it down. Still need to test, make sure the MOSFET's working. Oh, I guess I could do that real quick. Let's just bring it up to temp. 'Cause it doesn't have to do anything to come up to temp. So, preheat PLA. And it appears everything's heating up as it's supposed to. So that's a good sign right there. Oh yeah, that's definitely getting warm quick. Alright, well, I guess I'm going to finish up a couple things off camera, like flashing the firmware and whatnot, and then this is ready to go to its new home.